Okay, girls, second video here on the Chapter 1 PowerPoint. We had just concluded with that really cool Powers of 10 video. And now I want to talk a little bit about what happens when you actually move into that oak tree and you get to the leaf, and then you talk about the cell, and then you look at the cell itself and what's inside the cell. And in biology, we actually deal with life on many different levels. And so your book takes kind of a really cool perspective on this. I mean, they show you an African savanna and say if you're looking at an African savanna, right, and you've got an African savanna that's on a biosphere, our Earth is considered a biosphere here, and then you've got an ecosystem, and an ecosystem is all of the living and non-living things within a particular area. Okay, all the living and non-living things within a particular area. Then you go to community, and a community actually refers to all of the living things in an area. Now, I want to introduce you to a couple of new words here, okay? So, abiotic is a term that literally means non-living, and biotic is a term that means living. So, when we talk about an ecosystem, we are talking about all abiotic and biotic. When you're talking community, you're actually only referring to the biotic, and that's really important. So if we're dealing with an African savanna, we're dealing with a group of zebras, for example. That would be zebras and giraffes and alligators and water buffalo and everything else that lives on the African savanna. All those would be a community of organisms. Now, if we get right down to a population, we're talking about the number of a particular species in a specific area. So that's the number of zebras that live in the African savanna. Then if you talk about an organism, you're talking about one living thing. So the zebra is the one living thing. Now we know a zebra is really similar to us in a lot of ways. It has an organ system, right? It has several different organ systems, in fact. So one of the organs in one of those organ systems, the cardiovascular system, is the heart. So the heart is actually made up of tissue, heart muscle, for example, and that tissue is made up of cells. Those cells are made up of molecules. Molecules are made up of atoms. So there is a distinct level. There are distinct varying levels of life according to biology. You could take the same example and use it almost everywhere in a marshland, in a freshwater habitat, in a brackish habitat, in the tundra region. You can use it everywhere. It works everywhere. Now, I want to show you one of the coolest things I probably have seen in a really long time, which talks about the various levels of life. Well, not so much talks about it, it shows you the various levels. Okay, I know this is going to be cut off just a little bit, okay, so bear with me. Up here in the left-hand corner, we actually show this really kind of cool grid. So this is going to be 1 millimeter. That's the size of everything here on this object, or that's the comparison here. So that's 1 millimeter. So you can see that a coffee bean is actually several millimeters wide and deep here. So if you get what I'm saying. But you can take this little scroll bar and you can scroll through this, and you can actually, like, this is Times New Roman, which is typically what a lot of you use, 12 point. You can scroll in here and you can go even more deeply into, and you can show how different things are compared in sizes. I mean, look at this. This is like a grain of salt. That's an amoeba, a paramecium, a human egg. And that means the eggs that we produce as females, literally, human sperm, X chromosome, a skin cell. These are all your epithelial cells, a red blood cell, Baker's yeast. This is a chromosome right here. That's what your DNA is coiled into. You have 23 pair of those in every single cell in your body. Inside your body, you also have mitochondria. Those are the powerhouses of your cells. Lysosomes, which help you digest small things within your cells. E. coli bacterium, which you may hear is a really bad guy, but it actually helps you digest a lot of things within your body. You have thousands and thousands and thousands of these guys living in your intestines right now. And they're small. They're incredibly small. You go smaller than a bacterium, you have bacteriophages, viruses. All of these are viruses: HIV, hepatitis, flu virus. You get even smaller than the viruses, and we're talking about ribosomes, which is where we make proteins, antibodies, which fight random things that infiltrate our body, hemoglobin, which carries oxygen, transfer RNA, which carries amino acids, And then you get to the components of DNA. You get to lipids, which is what makes up all of our cell membranes, glucose, which is literally the energy for every single cell we have. And this is an example of an amino acid. And then you get all the way down here and you have a water molecule and a carbon atom, which is carbon is the element of life. So incredibly critical. Isn't that cool? That's way, way cool. You know what? You need to kind of see where that came from so you can look it up yourself right now and do it yourself. Go to this particular website, okay? Let me scroll down here. Go to learngeneticsutah.edu and you'll find it, okay? Try that out for yourself. One of the things I really find pretty fascinating is how do we actually define life? I'll tell you that all living things are actually referred to as organisms, and that's kind of an important term. You're an organism, I'm an organism, squirrels are organisms, bacteria are organisms. So an organism is defined as any living thing. So that's something you should write down, okay? Now, what makes something a living thing though, right? What does it have to do or be in order to be living? I used to have this really cool game I would play with my middle schoolers, and I would bring in, honestly, I'm not kidding, grape jelly in a Ziploc bag. And I would pull it out of this really cool cooler that had NASA emblems all over the outside. And I honestly, it's a slight lie, but I said that I'd gotten it from a friend of mine who worked at NASA, and they discovered it on a foreign planet. And we were supposed to take this sample and see if we could determine or ascertain whether or not it was alive. The kids were like crazy about this, right? I mean, they started saying, poke it and see if it moves. Well, all living things don't move, right? They don't. Trees don't necessarily move unless they're blown by the wind. So that's obviously not something you look at. All living things don't talk. What, however, does make something living? And here's kind of a classic set of rules to determine or ascertain whether something is alive. All living things have a certain order, and all living things are composed of cells, and that's the basis of all their order. A cell is the smallest living component of any organism. All living things are capable of regulating themselves. Like your normal body temperature is 98.6 degrees. I'm going to tell you it's going to stay about that all the time unless you're sick and fighting an infection. But we're all going to be able to regulate that, okay? All living things are capable of growing and developing. All of us started out as these little tiny babies with really big heads, and we grew into adults. We grew into a completely different looking organism. I mean, think about a caterpillar and how it goes through a metamorphosis into a butterfly. That's an amazing growth and reproductive process or development process. All living things utilize energy. It's a great picture of a hummingbird, right? Trying to eat nectar. It eats nectar because it needs energy. The same reason we eat food. Why in the world would you ever eat food? It's kind of a weird thing if you think about it. We eat because we're hungry. Why are we hungry? It's our body telling us that we need more energy. Now, if you go back to that picture of the African savanna, and we talked about ecosystems, I want to make sure you understand this, okay? An ecosystem is all of the living and non-living. Remember, all the biotic and the abiotic things that live within a particular area. So organisms actually interact with all of the abiotic things that surround them, right? So if you think about abiotic things, what are we talking about? We're talking about air, soil, rocks, water. None of those things are alive, but all living things need those sort of items within their environment in order to be successful. Okay, so both organisms and the environment are affected by those interactions that we have. You've heard a million times, we are right now as a human race destroying the environment in which we live. We are probably causing global warming to take effect faster than it ever would have on a natural basis. So we have an impact on our environment, and our environment has an impact on us. I mean, think about the oil spill. We are currently destroying more ecosystems than I can possibly even begin to name. And our environment can destroy us. You think about Katrina, Hurricane Katrina. I mean, it destroyed a tremendous number of human lives and other organisms in its path. So our environment is a fairly hostile place in which we live. If you get right down to it, though, the most important thing here is that the dynamics of any ecosystem depend on two processes. We all cycle nutrients, or our ecosystems cycle nutrients, and our ecosystems depend on a certain flow of energy. So these are two very important things. And I'll show you a picture just to explain what I'm talking about. And it's pretty simple stuff, right? All of the energy on this planet, every single bit of energy that's ever existed came originally from the sun. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek because we do still kind of float on some hot molten lava, and it hasn't it hasn't cooled yet. So even as a planet that was revolving really, really quickly, that was a hot orb of gas, we haven't cooled down completely, even after 4.6 billion years, which, by the way, 4.6 billion years is the age of our Earth. It's a pretty long time. So all energy comes originally from the sun. It comes into mainly plants that are capable of photosynthesis because they contain chlorophyll. These guys are called producers. They're also called photosynthetic organisms because they use the energy from the sun, right? Photosynthetic always means to make, so they make energy from the sun. Now, we aren't capable of making our own energy, so we have to eat producers, or we eat consumers that eat producers. So you think about it, we'll eat cows, right? We eat chickens, we eat pigs. All of those things eat producers, and we are a secondary consumer. So a consumer is anything that cannot make its own food. Let me introduce you to two new words here, okay? Anything that is capable of making its own food is considered to be an autotroph. I make my own food. I am automic. I can make my own food, autotroph. And anything that consumes its own food, right, is called a heterotroph. So we're heterotrophs. Okay, now not to leave these guys out because these guys are really, really critical. So once an animal dies, a plant dies, you don't just have a lot of dead animals and plants that still exist on this planet because they're all going to decompose. There are very critical organisms on our planet that decompose both of these, and they return all of those original nutrients to the soil, to the air, and they become recycled nutrients within the ecosystem. Okay, so that's why this is considered to be the cycling of nutrients.